Today we learn about absolute and relative paths in HTML. First of all, to understand what a path is, we use the image tag because this really gives us the chance to understand them. And if I'm in the index.html file right now, I need to define the path to my image.png to display an image. So I can in this case just say, okay, the image is in the image folder and this will display the image basically. Now, what would happen if I would actually create a new folder and say that this is my images folder and I'll drag my image inside of the images folder. Now I have this image in the images folder and now we are not seeing the image anymore because the image tag can't find the image at this location. So we need to define a location. And if you think about a website, it's basically structured like a normal folder on your PC. And you can navigate within your folder, you can go into a folder, you can go backwards and so on. And you can do the same when writing code, but it looks a little bit different. So just think about a normal folder, but you have to navigate through the folder with code basically. It makes it a lot easier if you just think about this in terms of normal folders. Now, if we want to get our image, previously our image tag was in the same folder as our index.html, so the file we are basically editing right now. So if the image is in the same folder like the index.html or the file you're editing at this time, you can just use the name of the file. Because it's obviously in the same folder, so you can just say image.png, but it's not in the same folder. So how do we get into the folder? As you already saw, we can just type images because that is the path to our images folder. And by going into images or by writing images / we go into our images folder. And now that we are inside of our images folder, we can see all of the content that is inside of our images folder. So we can basically select our image.png. And by doing so, you'll see we have the image right here again. But what would actually happen if we would create a new folder that says, for example, HTML files. And now I'll drag my index.html into my HTML files folder. Now, to get to my images folder, I first of all need to get back up into my HTML folder. And then from the HTML folder, I need to get into my images folder. And here inside of my images folder, I need to select my image.png. So I'm inside of the HTML files folder right now because I'm inside of my index.html. So I go one step up and then I go into the images folder. And I can go one step up by using /. And by doing so, we now went one folder up, so one step up. Now we are inside of the HTML folder. Inside of the HTML folder, I can now select my images folder by using images /. And by doing so, I go into the images folder again. Now that I'm inside of the images folder, I can select my image.png file. And by doing so, we should see our image.png, but we are actually not because we didn't open our index.html with the live server at the right location. But as you can see, once we reopen with the live server, it now has the right location as well, right here, because now our index.html is inside of HTML files / index.html. So we needed to reopen that file, and now it displays our image once again. Now the thing that I explained to you is a relative path because we are thinking in a way that is relative to the folder we are working in right now. So the path we defined here is relative to our index.html file, so the file we are working on right now. There also exists the option to define an absolute path. Now let's define an absolute path. If we use an absolute path, we always think as if we start from the root folder of the project. And as you can see, we right now opened the HTML folder. So HTML is basically the root folder of our project and everything else is inside of this root folder. So HTML files is a folder inside of the root folder HTML. Images is a subfolder of HTML and so on. App.js is a file inside of the HTML folder whatsoever. And to start from an absolute path, you just use a / in the beginning. And as you can see, it shows already in the code editor everything that is basically inside of our root folder. Inside of our root folder, we have the app.js, we have the content.html, we have the HTML files and so on. So if we want to get into images, we basically use a / images / and by doing so we are going into the images folder. And now we select our image.png and we have our image right here once again. So there are two options to navigate in HTML. You can use absolute paths and you can use relative paths. When using a relative path, you always define the location of something relative to the file you're currently working on. If you use an absolute path, you always think as if you're working or starting from the root directory, and everything else works exactly the same. Navigating works the same. If you use .. for example, you go one folder up. If you use images / for example, you navigate into the folder, or let's just say folder /, so just the folder name and then a /, you navigate into the folder, and so on. And that is all you need to know about relative and absolute paths in HTML.